As if anyone's cooked egg whites before, you know that it's just so much more challenging than full eggs because they stick to the pan and stuff. So here's my quick tip for everyone is, oil your pan, use a nonstick, whatever. Put in your stuff that you're going to put in the egg whites. Cook it on high like you're cooking normal egg whites or medium heat, but then turn it down to low and cover it and just leave it for like 10 to 15 minutes, 10 minutes. And it's just like, it almost bakes it a little bit, but it keeps the nonstick underneath. It's just a beautiful thing. If I had it here, I'd show you. I kind of made it for lunch for later. But that's my quick tip with egg whites. It's just a little bit.
Thanks for that lovely opener. Welcome to the Family Legacy Podcast, the podcast that goes beyond legal jargon and gets to the root of how to ensure your past, present, and future are protected. This episode is brought to you by the Rutkowski Law Firm, Michigan's leading asset protection, estate planning, Medicaid, and elder law firm. And you just heard from our host today, Michael Rutkowski. Michael, happy Tuesday.
Yeah, happy Tuesday. Excited to be here.
How's it going?
It's going good. It's going good. It's been a good start to the week. Went to the Michigan State game over the weekend with the kids. It's everything's flowing in the right direction.
Fall is here.
Yeah, pumpkin spice lattes for those who love that stuff. Pumpkin everything. Pumpkin candles, pumpkin drinks, pumpkin whatever. You just throw it in anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
I am actually doesn't have pumpkin in it, but it gives me like that. I'm making a beef stew for tonight, and so it's simmering, and all of the thyme
all the
smells.
fall things, chili. Oh my gosh! A month ago, when the weather dropped into the 60s for one day, we're like all the chili, bringing in all the fall foods. We're jump right in. Sweatshirts, chili, so good.
Yes. Oh, I love fall. Love it.
We're probably going to talk a lot about food on here. I'm getting the sense that we both love that stuff. But anyways, let's keep rolling.
A little bit. Well, what's your favorite? You mentioned chili, so is chili your go-to?
Yeah, chili's the fall go-to for sure. I drink warm drinks all year, coffee and stuff, so there's nothing changes there. But yeah, more chilies and those kinds of things.
Do you have a favorite go-to recipe? Maybe we can drop it in the.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. Been making it for 20 years. It's going in. We'll put a link in for sure. All right, now you're getting recipes here. I mean, this is
yes. Welcome to the show. This is how we roll. We are family oriented, and with family comes just cooking. It's a joy. I have found the joy in it because I haven't always.
For sure.
I found the struggle in it first before I found the joy. But yeah, we're rocking out the stew tonight. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good.
Nice.
For today, I wanted to talk to you. I wanted you to tell me all the things as it relates to estate planning and asset protection.
Sure.
Apparently, they're different.
Yeah, they are for sure. You ready for me to?
Let's do a definition for each on what they are, and then why don't you tell me what makes them different?
Yeah, and I would say from a general sense, when people are thinking about estate planning, first thing that comes to mind is what's going to happen to my stuff when I pass. That's what's on everyone's mind. They're like, should I use a will, a trust? We can definitely get into the difference of those things, or tools, really. You want to look at them as tools because they accomplish different things. But everyone starts with who's going to get my stuff when I pass. In general estate planning, something that's also incredibly important is planning for periods of incapacity. So whether you're unable to make decisions just because of the aging process of life, or you've gotten in a car accident and you can't make decisions for yourself, having some powers of attorney in place is just imperative, because you'll learn as we talk more in this podcast is that you want to avoid the court system. At least in most states, the court system is very challenging. It's time consuming and it's expensive for you, for your family. So you want to avoid the court system. So the first kind of foundational estate planning an individual should do is plan for what's going to happen to my stuff when I pass and who's going to make decisions for me if I can't make decisions for myself. And so that's your general estate planning. Now, from there's lots of more comprehensive options, like While I'm doing that, can I also protect my assets from things like lawsuits, creditors, bankruptcy, and a big one that we help with is long-term care costs. Long-term care in this country right now is anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000 per month. And so when you see the term elder law attorney, that's typically what that is helping families qualify for governmental benefits that are available so that you don't have to spend $10,000 to $15,000 per month. So that's an option. Taking estate planning like one step further, you can protect your assets also while you're doing estate planning. You can also protect your assets from taxes. If you have a taxable estate, there's certain types of trusts and estate planning you can do to minimize that tax burden. So essentially, everyone should have some kind of foundational estate planning, but it's up to you whether asset protection, tax planning, those kinds of things are important to you also. There's the definitions.
Yes, the definitions. And so it sounds like the main differences are that you need one to ensure you keep your assets protected after you pass, and the other one's to protect your assets during and after.
Yes, it's a much more you-focused approach. So it's like, how do we protect the assets for the individual we're planning for while they're alive and still want to use them? A lot of times it seems like this is a planning for my kids, or it's a planning for the next generation, like who's going to get my stuff, and great, I'm going to make it all easy and nice for them. But really, it's kind of taking it that next step where we're more focusing on the individual that's sitting in front of us, as well as the next generation of their family.
Yes, so let's talk
What's
about what are some of the sort of the triggers of either, right? So why would somebody decide that they need estate planning and or asset protection? Because
yeah,
there's
yeah,
different triggers for each, right?
for sure, for sure. I would say estate planning is an interesting thing where most people know that they need it, but kind of it's one of those things where they just might not get to. Um, Less than half of people in this country have estate planning in place, whether that's a will, powers of attorney, or anything at all. A lot of people think that, I'm just going to wait for, if they're married, they're like, I'll wait for one of us to pass and then we'll figure all this out. And unfortunately, it doesn't really work that way. So it's interesting. I would say there's like two phases of a person's life where they're like, okay, I got to get this done. Having kids, they're like, okay, need to grow up, do all the things, get insurance in place, maybe start some college funds and do my estate planning. Because as a young parent, and we talked about this a lot in our last episode, it's who's going to be the parents of my kids and how do I want to structure the distribution to them? Because I know if I give it to them at a young age, they're not going to use it responsibly. And then a lot of the families that plan next is that like retirement age, where they're like, everyone's getting all their ducks in a row, financially, estate planning, all that. The in between, sometimes, I get the sense that everyone feels like they're invincible. Is that the word I'm looking for? Like they've like raised their kid to they're like 16, 17. They're like, they'll figure it out. And so they kind of wait until, unless they have a personal experience with something like the probate court. I mentioned earlier that a lot of families start there. They're like, I want to avoid that. If you have any experience with the probate court, why people want to avoid it is because time consuming and expensive. So let's talk about that. Usually it's going to take anywhere between 9 and 18 months for an estate to go through the probate process. That's filing with a judge, waiting for something called the notice to creditor period to end. Essentially, that's anyone who wants to make a claim on the estate, you have a certain period of time to do so. And then after that, you're forever barred. So we have to wait for that to pass. And so it's anywhere between 9 and 18 months before a judge is going to release all the assets for distribution. That's with no one fighting about anything. And the interesting thing about the probate court is we have to keep everyone, it's called, you have to provide notice to interested parties. So essentially you're sending out an invitation to the whole family to say, hey, in a couple months, we're having a hearing down at the probate court. If you feel like you deserve some of this estate, come on down and tell us why. That's essentially what that is doing. And that, then it's like off to the races. Everyone's got their own attorney, especially towards end of life. People are like, well, I cut the grass for this person for the last year of their life, or I checked the mail. I mean, everyone feels like money makes people do interesting things. And I cannot tell you how many families we've seen ripped apart because they've had to go through the probate process. So that's just the time component. Then it's like what of the assets is this going to cost? And it usually costs between 5 to 10% of the value of the estate to get it transferred to the next generation through probate. And we can avoid all this through probate avoidance planning, through trust, through there's a lot of ways to do it. Trust is a main one, but avoiding that probate process is key because, do some simple math. A house worth $100,000, that could cost 5 to 10,000 just to transfer that to the kids. It's crazy. There's, attorney fees, there's inventory fees from the court. They take a percentage. It just keeps adding up. And that's without everyone having their own attorney. Once everyone's on the clock, it just gets ugly. Just gets ugly.
In terms of avoiding probate, we definitely want to estate plan. In terms of asset protection, does asset protect, like if you just got asset protection, would that help you avoid probate, or do you need both, or
Yeah,
does
great question.
one roll into the other? How do they work together?
Yeah, great question. Typically it's together because asset protection a lot of times is done through trust planning. And trust, by the nature of a trust, it's going to avoid the probate process. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone when you do asset protection, because it not only avoids probate, but it also protects your assets for you from things like lawsuits, creditors, bankruptcy, and long-term care costs is the big one. Getting you qualified for the Medicaid long-term care benefit, VA aid and attendance if you're qualified for that, so that you don't have to spend $10,000 to $15,000 per month. So a lot of families are doing that because it not only does your foundational estate planning, but it also does these other things that are really important to a lot of people. So a lot of families that we work with choose that style of planning. And a big misconception, so a question we get a lot is like, what's the difference between a revocable and irrevocable trust? That's a big one, because the term irrevocable just scares people. And here's why. Here's what I say to everyone. We all learned about irrevocable trusts back in like the year 2000-ish, when the estate tax was way less and everyone was using irrevocable trusts to avoid paying taxes when transferring wealth from one generation to the next. And those types of trusts, because they're governed under the IRS code, as you can imagine, which is very strict, you can't be the trustee of your own trust, and you can't touch those assets ever again, but they do transfer to the next generation. So essentially you put them in this trust, they're locked up. Everyone gets nervous about that when you hear the term irrevocable trust. Asset protection trusts are a totally different animal. A lot of them, you can still be the trustee of your own trust. You can still have access to be able to make changes. If you want to change the distribution scheme in there, you can still use the assets if you need to. It all depends on what type of asset protection that we're doing. Under Medicaid's rules, I like to say the Medicaid Asset Protection Trust is as close to a revocable living trust as possible. You still have so much control. But then it just, from there, we talk to families a lot about like, what are their goals? Do you also want to do lawsuit asset protection? Okay, if that's the case, then maybe we need to start talking about a third-party trustee to manage the trust. A third-party trustee just means someone other than yourself to manage it, because that would check the box on lawsuit asset protection. A lot of states have their own domestic asset protection statutes. And so we always have to look at those when we're doing planning to make sure it fits. But, it's just a matter of what do the clients want to do? But a lot of times it's silly to be so scared of the term irrevocable trust, because when you walk through options and you talk to families about how they can still control the assets, they're more than comfortable with it. But Google just always takes people down a bad rabbit hole.
Yeah, I would say especially right now with the lawsuit that's currently going on between is it Weinstein? I don't know if you've been paying attention,
Yeah,
but he's been dabbling with his trusts and trying to live on forever, apparently, is how people are
yeah.
talking about it.
Yeah, and when it comes to lawsuit asset protection, I just want to touch on that a little bit. The main goal of our planning is to make it as difficult as possible for the plaintiff attorney in whatever case that they're filing, make it as difficult as possible to access the assets. And there's all different levels of that. We're always kind of working with the family to see, okay, do you have like are you a physician where you have a very high likelihood you're going to be sued? Like it's a risk versus reward situation. And there's all kinds of levels of asset protection we can do. Everything from that light irrevocable trust where you're still in control of everything to offshore trusts. I mean, if you really feel like you're in such a situation where you're getting your potential for lawsuits is extremely high, maybe we're talking about offshore trusts. There's a lot of options in between as well. And like that's our job as attorneys to guide the families through these conversations.
There's too many options, Michael.
There's so many options, but again, that's everyone always asks, like, should I do this stuff on like LegalZoom or any of the other online websites? And it's not that you wouldn't end up with a trust. It's just guiding to make the right decisions is where an attorney can be so extremely helpful because there are so many options. When most people think about estate planning or they're talking to their friends, most people are talking about a revocable living trust. And the reason that is because there's so many attorneys out there that they do divorce, they do real estate, and they also do estate planning. And their expertise ends at revocable living trust planning. They're not aware of all these other options that can be so valuable to families, reducing the taxable estate, asset protection, all these things. It's a lot.
I feel like, yeah, and I feel like we've intertwined estate planning and asset protection again. Have you, in terms of the trusts you just talked about, I just want to be clear with folks, in terms of the trusts you just talked about, is that generally asset protection? You mentioned, trying to keep it out of the courts, from tax standpoint, from people being able to touch it.
Yep.
It sounds like the trust aspect of an estate plan is really the asset protection piece.
When you're talking about a revocable living trust, it has really one objective, and that is keep it out of the court system and get it to your kids or whoever you want it to go to as easy as possible. That is what a revocable living trust is. Any asset owned by a revocable living trust is as though you own it personally. So there is no asset protection whatsoever when it comes to revocable living trusts. Okay, just to be clear.
Yep.
Next level planning, irrevocable trust, which there's a million versions of that. That's where we can start getting into protecting the assets as well as avoiding the probate court and getting it to your kids or whoever you want it to go to as easy as possible. Does that make sense? So it's kind of next level planning.
Yes. And why would you want to protect your assets while you're living? What are some key areas there of like why an asset protection?
I would say the biggest three reasons are lawsuit asset protection. We are in a country where there's like a 90% likelihood that you're going to be in a lawsuit at some point in your life. Car accidents. I mean, that's why you see all that. If you're in Michigan, Mike Morris Law Firm. If you're down, in the Florida South, it's Morgan and Morgan. You see those billboards everywhere because pretty much every car accident is going to end up in some type of litigation. Okay. So litigation's a big one. The next one is long-term care costs. So it's qualifying for the Medicaid and VA aid and attendance so that you don't have to pay $10,000 to $15,000 a month for your care when you need it. And then the third big one is taxes. So those are the big three why we move to the next level from a revocable living trust.
What are last question for you? We're out of time. It flies. It just flies by here, Michael. So last question for you. And as always, folks, if you have any questions for us, please send us an email and we'll get those answered. I'm only going off of the very limited time we have to answer as many questions as we can. So last question is, what are the most common mistakes people make? So as they're looking into these things and saying, okay, I want an estate plan and I want the asset protection, what are some pitfalls that they should sort of steer clear of or be aware of?
The first one that comes to mind, which is the biggest pitfall of all of this, is missing the funding. So what that means is when you do a trust, your assets need to then be put into the trust. And I would say 99 out of 100 law firms out there don't help you with that. They typically draft up the documents and then they say, client, it is now your job to put those assets into the trust. We at our law firm, we help our families with that because I realized that 15 years ago that no one was putting their stuff into their trust. And so we do that for families, but that is the number one pitfall is once you've taken the step to do planning, you got to make sure you cross the finish line and get your stuff into it. That means checking, savings, insurances, your home, properties, all of that needs to be tied to the trust in one way, shape, or form. That's probably the biggest missed opportunity. And then the second is just working with an attorney that specializes in this area to lay out all of your options to accomplish what you want to accomplish with your estate plan. Those are probably the two biggest things I see.
In terms of the funding piece, it sounds like you're tying your assets to the trust, but it's not actually. I'm
I know
asking because
what you're
I
saying. I
yeah,
know what
like,
you're saying.
are then all my
So
assets tied up and I can't do
yeah,
like, what if I
it all depends on the type of trust you do, whether we need to retitle all the accounts into the trust or make beneficiary designations. There's a lot that goes into what you just asked. We could probably do a whole podcast on it, and we should. What does funding look like? Because honestly, every account's a little bit different. We could walk through that in another podcast.
Okay.
I'd love to do it.
Let's do that. We'll do a follow-up, folks, because I have a lot of questions around the funding piece and what happens to our assets once they're tied. Are they tied up? That's my big question.
All
We're
right.
going to unpack that later. Just
Yeah, let's do
you
it.
wait. If you have any questions and would like them answered, please email us at mlr@rutkowskilawfirm.com, and we'll be sure to grab those questions for the next episode. Michael, before we go, we talk every 7 days. I love this. We're in a flow. What are you most looking forward to in the week to come?
Oh, that's a good one. Right now is just a great time with family, to be honest. Kids are back in school, but the weekends are fun packed with their activities again. And, last weekend we went to the Michigan State game, and it ain't gonna be long before we're apple picking and doing all that stuff. So time with family is just great right now.
It is. Before we hunker down for winter, it's like the
Yeah.
last hurrah to get outside. I totally love that. Amazing. Michael, thank you always for your expertise. And thank you again to our listeners. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. This episode was brought to you by the Rutkowski Law Firm, Michigan's leading asset protection, estate planning, Medicaid, and elder law firm. If you'd like our help in estate planning and asset protection, please give us a call at 248-955-2842. Again, that's 248-955-2842. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Michael. See you next week.
Take care.